There was a room in the Whitmore mansion that nobody was allowed to enter. It sat at the end of the longest hallway on the second floor, its door always locked, its windows always dark. The servants whispered about it when they thought no one was listening. Some said it held treasure. Others said it held secrets too terrible to speak aloud. But 10-year-old Emma, the gardener's daughter, knew the truth. She had peeked through the keyhole once. Inside that room were photographs. Hundreds of them. Pictures of a woman dancing, running, jumping, spinning with her arms wide open like she owned the sky. The woman wore flowing dresses and bright smiles. She looked so alive that Emma could almost hear her laughter through the thick wooden door. That woman was Mrs. Ella Whitmore, and she hadn't walked in 20 years. Now, Ella Laner sat in her golden wheelchair in the grand living room, surrounded by more money than most people see in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Paintings worth millions covered the walls. Soft rugs from distant countries cushioned every floor. Everything sparkled and shined. But Ella Laner's eyes were empty. She was 52 years old, but she looked like a ghost. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Her hands rested in her lap like dead birds. She stared out the window at the garden she could never walk through, at the fountain she could never dance beside, at the world she could no longer touch. 20 years ago, an illness had attacked her body like a thief in the night. It came suddenly, viciously, without warning. One morning she woke up and couldn't feel her legs. By afternoon, she couldn't move them. By evening, doctors surrounded her bed with serious faces and quiet voices. "I'm sorry," they said. "You'll never walk again." Her son Daniel was only 12 then. Now he was 32, and he had spent half his life trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. He brought doctors from New York who poked and prodded. He flew in specialists from London who made her swallow bitter medicines. He hired experts from Switzerland who attached strange machines to her legs and pumped electricity through her muscles. Nothing worked. "It's impossible, Mr. Whitmore," they all said, using different words but meaning the same thing. "The damage is permanent. Your mother will remain in that chair forever." Daniel refused to believe them at first. But year after year, disappointment piled on top of disappointment until hope became too heavy to carry. So he built a different kind of life for his mother. A safe life, a careful life, a life of nurses and schedules and protection. Nurse Catherine came at 8 in the morning. Nurse Patricia took over at 4 in the afternoon. Nurse Helen worked through the night. They bathed Ella Laner, dressed her, fed her, moved her from wheelchair to bed and back again. They were efficient and professional and perfectly polite. They treated her like a fragile piece of expensive china. And Ella Laner hated every second of it. She hated the way they spoke to her in soft, slow voices, as if her legs being broken meant her mind was broken too. She hated how they decided everything. What she would wear, what she would eat, where she would sit. She hated the pity in their eyes. Most of all, she hated that she had given up fighting. The mansion hummed with silence. Oh! There were sounds. Footsteps on marble floors, doors opening and closing, the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. But there was no real noise. No laughter. No music. No life. Until the day Grace arrived. Grace came on a Tuesday in October, when the leaves were turning gold and red. She walked up a long driveway carrying a single small bag, her head held high, her steps confident and sure. She was 35 years old with dark skin that glowed in the autumn sunlight and eyes that seemed to see everything. Daniel had hired her from an agency. "Another nurse," he explained to his mother. "Nurse Helen is retiring, so Grace will take the night shift." Ella Laner barely looked up. Another nurse meant nothing to her. They were all the same, smiling strangers who would move her around like furniture and pretend to care. But Grace was different. On her very first evening, she did something shocking. When Daniel showed her around the mansion and explained all the rules, what time Mrs. Whitmore ate dinner, how she liked her pillows arranged, which room she preferred, Grace listened quietly. Then she walked into the living room where Ella Laner sat in her wheelchair, staring at nothing. Grace didn't bow. She didn't curtsy. She didn't use that soft, pitying voice. Instead, she pulled up a chair, sat down right in front of Ella Laner, and looked her directly in the eyes. "Hello, Mrs. Whitmore," Grace said in a voice that was warm but firm. "My name is Grace, and I'm not here to take care of you like you're a baby or a doll. I'm here to help you live." Ella Laner blinked, startled. No nurse had ever spoken to her like that. "I don't need help living," Ella Laner said coldly. "I need to be left alone." Grace smiled, but it wasn't a fake, polite smile. It was real. "Maybe you do need to be left alone," she said. "But first, we're going to rearrange these bookshelves." "What?" Ella Laner stared at her. "You will do no such thing. Those books are organized exactly how I want them." "They're organized so you can't reach them," Grace said calmly, standing up. "All the good ones are on the top shelf, and you're stuck down here. That's not organization. That's cruelty." And before Ella Laner could protest, Grace started moving books. She took down the heavy volumes of poetry that Ella Laner loved, the novels she used to read before she gave up on everything, the photo albums she hadn't opened in years. She placed them on the lower shelves, right where Ella Laner could reach them from her chair. "Stop." Ella Laner's voice shook with anger. "Who do you think you are? You can't just—" "I already did," Grace said, dusting off her hands. "Now you can read again. You're welcome." She walked out of the room, leaving Ella Laner trembling with fury. But later that night, when everyone was asleep, Ella Laner reached for one of the poetry books. Her hand shook as she pulled it from the shelf she could now reach all by herself. She opened it and saw her own handwriting in the margins, notes she had written decades ago when she believed life was full of possibility. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and for the first time in 20 years, it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of something she had forgotten existed. Hope. Grace didn't act like the other nurses, and Ella Laner didn't know what to do about it. The next morning, Grace wheeled Ella Laner out to the garden, but instead of parking the wheelchair in the usual shady spot and walking away, Grace sat down on the grass beside her. She didn't ask permission. She just sat there, her face turned at the sun, breathing deeply. "What are you doing?" Ella Laner asked suspiciously. "Sitting," Grace said. "You should try it sometime." "I'm already sitting." "No," Grace said, opening her eyes. "You're existing. That's different from sitting. Sitting is when you choose to be still. Existing is when you have no choice." Ella Laner felt anger bubble up inside her again. "You don't know anything about me." Grace turned and looked at her with those sharp, seeing eyes. "I know you used to dance." The words hit Ella Laner like a slap. Her breath caught in her throat. How? How do you know that?" "I saw the photographs," Grace said simply, "in the locked room upstairs." Ella Laner's face went white, then red. "You had no right. That room is private. Daniel will fire you for this." "Maybe," Grace said, not looking worried at all. "But before he does, answer me one question. Why did you lock those pictures away?" "Because," Ella Laner's voice cracked, "because they hurt too much to look at. That woman in those photographs is dead." "No, she's not," Grace said quietly. "She's sitting right here, telling herself lies." Ella Laner wanted to scream at her. She wanted to call for Daniel and have this impossible woman thrown out of her house. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Grace looked at her, not with pity, but with something that felt almost like respect. "My legs don't work," Ella Laner whispered. "I'll never dance again. I'll never even walk again. Every doctor says so." Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Doctors said my little brother would never speak. He was born with something wrong in his brain. They told my mama to put him in a special home and forget about him. They said it was impossible. And," Ella Laner asked, even though she didn't want to care, "and my mama said, I don't believe in impossible." She worked with him every single day for 5 years, talking to him, singing to him, making him try. And you know what? On his 6th birthday, he said his first word, "Mama, the doctors were wrong." "That's different," Ella Laner said. "Your brother was a child. I'm old. My body is broken beyond repair." Grace stood up, and brushed grass from her pants. Your body is asleep. There's a difference. She started to walk away, then stopped. Tomorrow morning, we start waking it up. What do you mean? Ella Laner called after her, but Grace just smiled and disappeared into the house. That night, Ella Laner couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Grace's words. Her body was asleep? What nonsense. The doctors had done tests, real medical tests with machines and scans. They knew what they were talking about, didn't they? She found herself thinking about the locker room, about the photographs of herself dancing at her wedding, running on the beach with baby Daniel, jumping into piles of autumn leaves. That woman seemed like someone from a dream, someone who had never been real. But she had been real. That was the worst part. The next morning, Grace came to her room before the sun was up. What are you doing here? Ella Laner asked groggily. It's still dark. The body wakes up better in the morning, Grace said, turning on a soft lamp. Come on, we have work to do. What kind of work? The hard kind. Grace positioned Ella Laner's wheelchair next to the bed, then locked the wheels. She knelt down beside Ella Laner's legs that hadn't moved on her own in 20 years, and placed her hands on them gently. What are you? Ella Laner started. Tell me if you feel anything, Grace said. She began to press and massage Ella Laner's right leg, her fingers working the muscles carefully, firmly. I don't feel anything, Ella Laner said. I never feel anything. I told you my legs are... Sure, Grace said. Stop talking and start listening. Not to me, to your body. Ella Laner wanted to argue, but something in Grace's voice made her close her mouth. Grace continued working, moving from the right leg to the left, her hands patient and strong. Minutes passed, then more minutes, and then... Wait, Ella Laner whispered. Wait, What? Grace's hand stilled. What do you feel? I don't know. Something. Like a tingling. Very faint. In my left foot. Grace's face broke into a huge smile. There she is. There who is? The woman who used to dance, Grace said. She's still in there. She's just been sleeping for a very long time. Over the next week, Grace came every morning before dawn. She worked Ella Laner's legs, bending them, stretching them, massaging them. At first, Ella Laner felt almost nothing, but slowly, painfully, sensation began to creep back. A tingle here, a flutter there, tiny sparks of feeling where there had been nothing but numbness. It hurt. Oh, how it hurt. Stop. Ella Laner cried one morning as Grace bent her knee farther than it had moved in years. Tears streamed down her face. Please stop. It's too much. But Grace didn't stop. Pain means waking up, she said firmly. Dead things don't hurt. You want to stay dead? Yes. Ella Laner sobbed. Yes, if this is what being alive feels like. Grace finally stopped. She sat back and looked at Ella Laner with understanding, not anger. I know it hurts. My brother used to cry too, every single day when my mama made him try to speak. But you know what he told me later, when he finally could talk. Ella Laner wiped her eyes. What? He said, the trying hurt, but being stuck inside myself with no way out hurt worse. Grace took Ella Laner's hand. Which hurt do you want to live with? That question haunted Ella Laner all day. She thought about it during breakfast. She thought about it while staring out the window. She thought about it when Daniel came to visit and asked cheerfully, How are you today, Mother? And she lied and said, Fine, dear. She was not fine. She was terrified. What if Grace was wrong? What if all this pain led nowhere? What if she let herself hope, really hope, and then failed? That night, something strange happened. Ella Laner was alone in her room. Grace didn't start her shift until later, when she felt it. A cramp in her left leg. Sharp and sudden and undeniable. A cramp in a leg that wasn't supposed to feel anything. Without thinking, she reached down and tried to rub it. Her hands pressed against her calf, and she felt her own touch for the first time in 20 years. The sensation was so shocking that she gasped aloud. And then impossibly, her left foot twitched. Just a tiny movement, the smallest curl of her toes. But it was movement. It was her movement. Ella Laner stared at her foot like it belonged to a stranger. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Grace," she whispered to the empty room. "Grace, I—" The door opened. Grace stepped inside for her night shift and immediately saw Ella Laner's face, pale and shocked and alive with something that looked like terror and joy mixed together. "What happened?" Grace asked, rushing over. "My foot," Ella Laner breathed. "It moved. I made it move." Grace knelt down beside the wheelchair. "Show me." Ella Laner stared at her left foot. She thought about dancing, about running, about standing on her own 2 feet. She thought about that woman in the photographs, the one who was supposed to be dead, and she thought, move. Her toes curled. Just barely. Just enough. Grace let out a laugh that sounded like a sob. "I knew it. I knew you were still in there." "What does this mean?" Ella Laner whispered. Grace looked up at her with fierce determination. "It means we're just getting started." "But the doctors said—" "The doctors don't live in your body. You do." Grace stood up. "Tomorrow we try something bigger. Tomorrow we see if you can stand." "Stand." Ella Laner's voice shot up. "That's impossible. One tiny movement doesn't mean—" "Stop," Grace said gently but firmly. "Stop saying that word. Impossible is just another way of saying I give up. And you're not giving up anymore." That night, Ella Laner didn't sleep at all. She lay in bed moving her toes over and over again, tiny movements that were somehow the biggest thing that had happened to her in 20 years. She thought about standing, about falling, about hoping and failing and trying again. She thought about Daniel, who had wrapped her in so much protection that she'd forgotten what it felt like to take a risk. And she thought about Grace, who refused to treat her like a broken doll. Outside her window, a storm was gathering. Dark clouds rolled in from the west. The wind picked up, rattling the tree branches. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Ella Laner watched the storm approach and felt something wild and fierce wake up inside her chest. Tomorrow, she would try to stand. Tomorrow, she would find out if that woman in the photographs was truly dead or just sleeping. Tomorrow, everything would change. The storm arrived at dawn, just as Grace came to Ella Laner's room. Rain hammered against the windows. Lightning flashed across the dark sky, turning everything silver for brief, blinding moments. Thunder shook the mansion's walls like a giant's footsteps. "Perfect weather for a miracle," Grace said, smiling as she entered. Ella Laner sat in her wheelchair, trembling. She hadn't slept. Her nightgown was damp with sweat. "I can't do this," she whispered. "What if I fall? What if I hurt myself? What if you stand?" Grace interrupted. She positioned herself in front of the wheelchair and held out both hands. "What if, for the first time in 20 years, you hold yourself up? What if that woman in the photographs, the one who danced and ran and lived, what if she comes back?" "She's gone," Ella Laner said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then let's go find her," Grace said. Her hands remained outstretched, steady and strong. "Take my hands, Mrs. Whitmore." Outside, lightning cracked so loud it sounded like the sky breaking open. Ella Laner's hands shook as she reached forward. Her fingers wrapped around Grace's, and she felt the warmth and strength there, solid and real and believing in something Ella Laner couldn't quite see yet. "Good," Grace said softly. "Now, I'm going to count to 3. On 3, you're going to push with your legs. Not with your arms. Not with your hands. With your legs. They remember how. They just need you to remind them." "Grace, I don't think." 1, Grace said firmly. Ella Laner's heart hammered in her chest. This was insane. 20 years of doctors, of tests, of certainty that her legs were dead. And here was this woman asking her to stand as if it were the simplest thing in the world. 2, Ella Laner closed her eyes. She thought about the locked room upstairs. The photographs of herself spinning in a golden dress at her wedding. Running barefoot on the beach. Jumping into Daniel's arms when he was just a little boy. She thought about all the life she'd lived before the illness came and stole it away. She thought about that woman, and she realized she missed her. 3, Ella Laner pushed. The pain that shot through her legs was unlike anything she'd ever felt. It was fire and ice and lightning all at once. Her muscles, so long asleep, so weak and forgotten, screamed in protest. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Her body refused. Her legs wouldn't respond. And then something shifted. Her knees straightened just a little. Her feet pressed against the floor, taking weight they hadn't carried in 2 decades. Grace pulled gently on her hands, and Ella Laner felt herself rising. She stood. Her legs shook so badly she thought they might shatter. Her whole body trembled like a leaf in a hurricane. Grace's hands gripped hers tightly, holding her steady, holding her up. "I'm standing," Ella Laner breathed. "Grace, I'm—" Her left leg buckled. She started to fall, and terror flooded through her. But Grace caught her, supporting her weight, keeping her upright. "Not yet," Grace said. "You're not done yet. Stand again. Come on, one more time." "I can't." "You just did." Grace's voice was fierce now, demanding. "Stop telling yourself stories about what you can't do and do it again." Thunder crashed outside, so loud the chandelier shook. Ella Laner pushed again. This time, her legs held longer. 5 seconds. 10. 15. "That's it," Grace whispered. "That's it. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel yourself holding yourself up. You're doing it. You're standing." Tears poured down Ella Laner's face. "It hurts so much." "I know," Grace said, "but you're alive. Dead things don't hurt, remember?" They stood there together, Grace holding Ella Laner's hands. Ella Laner standing on legs that had been silent for 20 years. The storm raged outside, but inside that room, something quieter and more powerful was happening. A woman was remembering how to be whole. "Now," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you ready for the impossible part? What could be more impossible than this?" Grace smiled, dancing. "You're insane." "Maybe," Grace said, "but I didn't come all this way just to watch you stand still. Come on, just one step. Just move your right foot forward. That's all. One step." Ella Laner stared at her foot. It seemed a million miles away. Every instinct told her this was madness, that she would fall, that she would break, that she should sit back down in her safe wheelchair and accept what she was. But then she thought, what am I? Am I the woman in the wheelchair? Or am I the woman in the photographs? Or maybe I'm both. Maybe I'm the woman who fell down and is learning to stand back up. Slowly, shakily, Ella Laner lifted her right foot. She moved it forward 6 inches and placed it down. One step. Grace laughed, a bright, joyful sound that filled the room like music. Yes, again. Left foot now. Ella Laner moved her left foot. Another step. Her legs screamed. Her muscles burned. Sweat dripped down her face. But she took another step. And another. They weren't walking. Not really. It was more like a careful shuffle, Grace moving backward as Ella Laner moved forward, their hands clasped together, their eyes locked on each other. But at Ella Laner, it felt like flying. "You're dancing," Grace whispered. And it wasn't the kind of dancing she'd done 20 years ago, spinning and leaping in full grace. It was slower, harder, more painful. But it was dancing nonetheless. It was movement. It was life. The door burst open. Daniel stood in the doorway, frozen in shock. He'd been walking past the room when he heard voices. Now he stared at his mother who hadn't stood in 20 years, standing on her own 2 feet, moving, dancing, tears streaming down her face. "Mother?" His voice was barely a whisper. Ella Laner turned her head to look at him and nearly lost her balance. Grace steadied her. "Daniel," Ella Laner said, and her voice was stronger than it had been in years. "I'm dancing." Daniel's face went through a dozen emotions in seconds. Shock, disbelief, joy, fear. "But how?" The doctors said. "The doctors were wrong," Ella Laner said. She took another small step, her legs shaking, but holding. They saw what was broken. Grace saw what was sleeping. "There's a difference." Daniel looked at Grace, really looked at her for the first time, not as just another nurse, but as a woman who had done what millions of dollars and the best doctors in the world couldn't do. She had given his mother back to herself. "Thank you," he whispered. Grace nodded. "Don't thank me. Thank her. She did the work. I just refused to let her give up." Ella Laner took 3 more steps. Then her legs finally gave out. Grace helped her back to the wheelchair, and Ella Laner collapsed into it, exhausted but laughing. "I stood," she said, looking up at Daniel with bright, alive eyes. "I stood and I walked and I danced. Did you see me?" "I saw you, Mother," Daniel said, kneeling beside her chair. He took her hand, the hand that had gripped Grace's so tightly, the hand of the fighter. "I saw you. I'm not a relic," Ella Laner said fiercely. "I'm not something to be preserved and protected and kept safe in a golden cage. I'm alive. And Grace kept me from rotting." Over the following weeks, Ella Laner practiced every day. Some days were better than others. Some days she could barely stand. Other days she walked the length of her room, then the hallway, then down the grand staircase with Grace beside her. The mansion, which had been silent for so long, filled with new sounds. Ella Laner's laughter, music playing from the old radio, the shuffle-step shuffle of someone learning to walk again. Daniel had the locker room opened. He and Ella Laner went through photographs together, and instead of crying over what was lost, they celebrated what had been found again. Emma, the gardener's daughter, saw Mrs. Whitmore walking the garden one afternoon, moving slowly but surely among the roses. She ran home and told her mother, "The miracle happened. The lady can walk again." And she was right. It was a miracle, not the kind that happens with a flash of light and angels singing, but the quieter kind, the kind that comes from someone refusing to accept impossible as an answer, the kind that comes from hard work and pain and stubborn hope, the kind that comes from one person seeing another person, really seeing them, and saying, "You are more than what's broken in you." On a bright morning 3 months after Grace first arrived, Ella Laner stood in the garden without help. Her legs were still weak. She would never run again, would never leap or spin like she once had. But she stood on her own 2 feet, her face turned up to the sun, breathing deeply. Grace stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. "I couldn't have done this without you," Ella Laner said. "Yes, you could have," Grace replied. "You just needed someone to remind you that you could." Ella Laner turned to her, this woman who had refused a bow, who had moved the books, who had seen the dancer still hiding inside the woman in the wheelchair. "You gave me my life back," Ella Laner said softly. Grace shook her head. "No, I just helped you remember it was there all along. You gave it back to yourself." And there in the garden, with the fountain bubbling and the birds singing and the sun warm on their faces, they stood together, proof that sometimes the most impossible thing in the world is simply refusing to give up. Sometimes a life can be revived not by medicine or money, but by human touch, by steadfast faith, by the choice to see a person as more than their chair, more than their pain, more than their past. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "I believe you can," and another person deciding to believe it too. That afternoon, Ella Laner danced again, slowly, carefully, joyfully, while Grace hummed a song and Daniel watched from the window with tears of gratitude in his eyes. The woman who hadn't walked for 20 years was walking. And more than that, she was alive. If you enjoyed the story of hope and second chances, please share with someone who needs to remember that impossible is just another word for "I haven't tried hard enough yet." Subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and wake up the soul.